I just wanted an opportunity to play music on my iPhone 6 Plus this morning. So that's what that was. Yeah. You should just think of it as your tuition dollars at work, all right? My fantasy football team is in really bad shape this weekend. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I promised you I would do this morning is to sort of review the black letter law that we've covered today, and there are a lot of different ways to do it. One will be just to stand up here and go through an outline and read you the outline. Another way would be to just list the cases that we've done and regurgitate the black letter law that's at the end of each case that we've already looked at. And while that might be helpful, I thought it might be interesting to model for you another way to think about learning the law. And it's something that some of you may be very familiar with and some of you may not. How many of you have played with the concept of mind mapping before? Just raise your hands high so I can see, because I have some sense. 1, 2. So about maybe a fifth of the class. Those of you who have used mind mapping before, why did you use it? Got a hand over here.
Professor K showed it to us in Torch.
Professor K showed it to you, okay. Did you use it in Torch?
Yes.
Was it helpful?
I thought so.
Why?
It helped me organize my thoughts a little bit better. Just rather than having like this huge paragraph of notes and trying to weed through when it came to outlining for my class at the end, mind mapping was just made a lot simpler to figure out the key concepts and how they related. It's a great tool to use the last verb you used, relationships. It's all about the relationships between different factors. It's very helpful. And the other thing that it does is it breaks down, at least for me, it takes something that may or may not be hierarchical and makes it non-hierarchical, which means that I can see it in a different way. And if I can see it in a different way, I find that I discover relationships that help me remember the information. We actually think as human beings in a relationship perspective as opposed to a logical progression perspective. And what most of education in the United States does is try to teach you to think in terms of hierarchy, to think in terms of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Not because that's the best way for you to learn it, but because that's the easiest way to teach an industrialized society to make new workers for the industrial world in which they live. Of course, what's the problem with that right now? You guys kind of live in the post-industrial age. You don't live in an industrialized age anymore. You live in the information age or the digital age or whatever you want to call it. And so I think this is helpful to us, and I'm going to use it this morning just to show you the way that I would do it. And there's no way that it has to be done. So I begin with this concept of the Fourth Amendment. I know that there's a Fourth Amendment, and I know that as part of the Fourth Amendment, there is a right of the people. Now, for those of you who are wondering what program is Professor Rose using to do this, this is a little program called iThoughts, which is really good for mind mapping on the iPad. There's another one called MindNode that may even be better. It's the rights of the people, but it's a particular kind of right to be secure.
So there's something about security here in their persons, places, houses, and effects. So I'm beginning to sort of pull out from the fourth this idea. But they're going to be secure against something too, right? So it's this right of the people to be secure. And I really think it's something like, oh, I don't know, against unreasonable search and seizure. But there's got to be a warrant. There's got to be probable cause. And there's got to be an oath or affirmation. So as I begin to pull it apart and look at it, I start to think that perhaps this whole concept of the Fourth Amendment is nothing more than a right of individuals as it applies to all these different pieces in their life against an unreasonable search and seizure. And an unreasonable search and seizure is one that doesn't have a warrant, one that doesn't have probable cause, or one that lacks an oath or affirmation. Now that's the language of the amendment that I have thrown up on the boards multiple times. But it's a fundamentally different way of looking at it, right? So that's the right of the Fourth Amendment that I'm concerned with. And then I start thinking about this pesky Fourth Amendment, and I begin to say to myself, well, you know, I wonder, let's see, I'm not going to let me pull it right now. What happens, how is this right defined? And I know that the court used to define it as trespass. And I also know that it's been defined as privacy. Trespass and privacy are the two ways that this Fourth Amendment right has been tested by the courts. And I know that trespass is an older doctrine that really still exists, I think, but I'm not sure how much. But I was really impressed by the Jones case. And I remember that Jones case had a GPS involved. It had a lack of a warrant. And it had this whole idea of trespass / reasonable expectation of privacy. And then I remember, as part of it, that there's some kind of split in the court about these two issues. And that sort of stuck in my head when I looked at trespass. Privacy, on the other hand, I go, well, man, I know privacy because we talked about that forever. I've got that whole Katz case. And Katz tells me that it's, hey, reasonable expectation of privacy. That has an objective prong, and a subjective prong. And I know that the objective prong deals with, yeah, look what I've done. I've broken it. There we go. I know the objective prong, there we are, deals with what society thinks. And I know the subjective prong, deals with what the individual thinks. And I know the whole reason for Katz is because of technology. And I think that technology may actually be nothing more than a Pandora's box of problems. Because when I tie I'm worried that technology may destroy the objective prong. because I know that as society changes and we always feel like less and less privacy is available. Now look at that. Look at all those relationships that are up there on that board, and I've been talking for maybe 5 minutes, right? But I've started to sort through in my head the way these cases connect to one another and the way in which they may be helpful for me. So I've talked about CATS and privacy, but I also know that CATS has got, let's see here, a bunch of defining cases. And when I look at defining cases, I'm looking for cases that sort of set out the boundaries of this reasonable expectation of privacy. And then as I begin to drop into CATS, the defining cases, what are some of them that we look at? Maryland v. White, right? And that's the Wire case. Then we've also got
U.S. v. White?
U.S. v. White. There you are. Thank you. See, I knew that I had that wrong, but I couldn't remember what it was. No, we don't want to listen to Miranda Lambert this morning. U.S. v. White, and then what was the Maryland case again?
Smith.
There we go. Maryland v. Smith. Oh.
Smith v. Maryland.
Smith v. Maryland. There we go. If you're wondering, no, Professor Rose really doesn't care whether or not you know the names of the cases specifically. But White for me is the wiretap with the snitch, because it's the dude. And I might write down a word here that you know, the guy who doesn't take care of his friends. But I won't put it up here in this outline because we're sharing it, right? And then Smith v. Maryland, what was that one about as I think about it in our heads? What is it? The pen register. All right. And what was the thing about the pen register? How was that decided? Is that we gave up that information in order to use the technology. So some idea about giving up to use, there's some issue there. And then the wiretap was really about no privacy in conversations, right? Now we can go through like this and begin to define. And here's the cool thing about this little mind mapping program is that I see the big picture. I begin to look at the big picture, and then I start thinking, hey, well, you know what? Let's go down here and just study a piece of it. Remember, CATS is the seminal case. It's a reasonable expectation of privacy. There's an objective prong, there's a subjective prong, and I'm really dealing with technology. I'm really dealing with technology. It's all designed to capture technology. But what it actually did when I actually go and read the cases is that it opens Pandora's box, because technology creates this real concern that society eventually will objectively believe that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. And then what happens when that societal objective expectation runs into the older Fourth Amendment trespass idea, which is sort of where we are right now from a law perspective. And that's what that Jones case that we ended last week with is about. And so I began to think about it, and then I realized, of course, the other part of CATS, which is one of the big cases that creates the right, is defining all the areas of the right. And I can literally go through with defining cases and pull out all of the other cases that are helpful to me. Now, in this mind mapping program, I don't know if I can remember how to do it or not. Let's see if I can. Let's say I had a case that doesn't mean what I think it means anymore. I can drop a little red light in there to remind me that I might have a problem. I've got a case that is the most important thing in my mind. It's like, you have got to know this one, and if I understand it, it's a winner. I begin to tie visual cues to my study of the subject. Now, I show you this because most of you are in fact not oral listening learners. And most of you in fact are not reading learners. Genetically speaking, most human beings tend to be visual learners. We tend to learn with our eyes. We tend to learn kinetically with touch, or we learn through some combination of those. And I happen to be an extremely visual learner with a kinetic piece as well. So for me, doing something like this puts this in my head so that I don't forget it. And the cool thing is that you should be able, with the table of contents for the text, to sit down as we go through each chapter and just say, hey, this is what this stuff means, and boil down everything into nothing more than 2 or 3 words that are important to us from an analytical perspective. And if we go back and look at our defining cases, and we just open the crossing the threshold, we could go through Bond, Serralo, and the rest of these. I'm not going to do them right now, but the neat thing about this is, let's say I would like to email this. I'll email the map. I'll include the outline. We'll do it as a PDF. Compose the email. We'll send it from my... What's your email address, Leon?
L-O.
L-O?
Hunter.
Oh, look, you're there. I've now shared it with everybody. Now, I could send it to the whole group, but we don't have a crim law or criminal procedure class yet. When we do, I'll email it to everybody. Y'all harass Leon. Everybody email him and ask for a copy of it. But I want you to think about it for a minute from the standpoint of transforming the way you think about this stuff. Something as simple as this can very quickly sort of change the way you do the work. And then I can begin to come back to the light, to work with it. Now, I'm showing it to you because mind mapping can be very effective. Now, I could come over here and we could do a new floating. We could say how to analyze Fourth Amendment question. The first thing that I might think in my head was, I want to know, was there government action? The second thing I might want to know, did the person have standing? The third thing I might want to know is, was a warrant issued? Now, this is just another way of going through the checklist that I've already given you for an analysis, but it's now looking at it in a spatial relationship. And if the warrant issued, if the answer's no, well, then I have to ask myself, did exceptions apply? And then I've got to list all the exceptions. If the warrant was issued and the answer's yes, then I look, was there probable cause? Was there oath? Did it describe properly? And I drop the definition of probable cause in there, and away I go. Feedback. Does seeing this, is it helpful? Too smart? Well, here's the thing. Look at that. See? Yeah, properly, yeah. I think eventually it'll actually spell check it for me, describe it properly. Look at that. It's almost professor proof. And mind mapping is very easy to do and is actually has a brainstorming activity when you're analyzing a case for the first time, a very useful tool. We could turn around and do this same thing, but instead of using the law, we could pull the facts from any particular case and mind map the facts of the case. And then you could have the case, you could have the law go to the left, and you could have the facts go to the right, and you can have your analysis go to the bottom. Now I'm now describing sort of the way my mind works, and then I pull the three together based upon what it is that I want. So as we think about the Fourth Amendment, as we're wrapping up our discussion of at least crossing the threshold and deciding whether or not there was a reasonable expectation of privacy, where we should be at this point is that reasonable expectation of privacy clearly exists as the doctrine of the court from the standpoint of an analytical tool that the majority of justices prefer. We're looking at Fourth Amendment violations. And you look at the objective intent of society and the subjective intent of the individual. And we know that this reasonable expectation of privacy was created because of the growth of technology and the options that technology gave the government to intrude without having to get a warrant, right? Because the government was capable of surveilling in a way that previously they were not capable of, and it sort of let the genie out of the bag. And the entire idea of reasonable expectation of privacy was to, at least at some level, redefine the Fourth Amendment rights so that the government would continue to have duties to get probable cause and to properly involve the court so that you have oversight of government surveillance. And what's actually happened instead is that the ability of technology, the way in which it has grown, has outstripped the ability of the courts to manage it. And it's been like a nuclear arms race of the application of reasonable expectation of privacy against technology. And it's come around so much now that the court is beginning to try to pull back in, at least elements of the court, the earlier trespass doctrine, which was never specifically overturned by Katz, but you should think of it as a field that has been covered with manure and has been allowed to lay fallow for an extended period of time to regenerate the soil so that plants can grow there again. They didn't sow the Fourth Amendment field of trespass with salt like Rome did to Carthage. They instead just sort of covered it with